right, keeping the whole child central from the start. That was the point of the policy paper research that we did. And we had the benefit of all of the input that we just heard, actually, that we've long sought to develop a whole child system to support our youth, by, for, and with them, including those in foster care, experiencing poverty, living with disabilities, historically impacted more than others. But fragmented public systems and siloed policies often prevent effective, coordinated care. And we didn't build this system. I actually see this as a civil rights movement for youth, probably because I'm a lawyer. But I do. I see this as a civil rights movement for youth. This system was built long before most of us, if all of us, ever entered it. And it operates a certain way. And so it was built by humans. It can be rebuilt by humans. It can be transformed by humans. And we're the humans who can do that. If you see it in a civil rights movement, no matter which civil rights movement it is, right? Those of the people who see the change, the need for change, are the ones who then start talking about it. And then what happens? Other people listen and they say, well, I see the need for that change. That's how we got here, by the way. I didn't plan to start a nonprofit. I was a lawyer for the schools with trauma and recovery, and I just said the system's not integrated, and it just kept going and going and going, and here we all are trying to better integrate it, and we will, by the way. I have no doubt that we will do this. I think that we're actually on a fast track to doing this right now. Even though we feel very divided, I think we have opportunity and technology and capacity for unity that we've never had since I started doing my job. So I am hopeful, very hopeful, and you're the ones who make me hopeful. So the outcomes of our research suggest that true integration in local service delivery requires integrated policymaking, that how we build policy impacts what happens at the local level. It's not the only factor that we need to tackle, right? We need shared leadership. We need youth in our leadership structures. We need them running our structures. We need them writing our policy with us, and we need them telling us if it isn't working for them. And then if it isn't working for them, what do we need to do? Change it. Stop doing it that way. Do it a different way. So we learned this in the paper. California's youth are still, despite all the resources that we just talked about, falling through the cracks in siloed systems. It's happening every day. We have youth who spoke about it here today. Recent initiatives are encouraging collaboration. We did actually an audit of all the recent initiatives, all that policy that Marnie just rattled off for billions and billions. It amounts to about $20 billion that was allocated into the system when we had an $80 billion state surplus for children and youth. But even though, if you read them all, they all say collaboration. They all say coherence. They all say coordination. They all say integration, unity, transformation, for children, whole child systems, whole person care. They all say that. But when you flush that much policy into the system, into siloed agencies at the same time, what happens? Anyone want to answer that? It can silo the system even more. It can silo us even further. So we're here to say, we aren't going to do that, though. We don't have to do that. We can behave a different way. We, the people, can implement that a different way together in unity and community. So that's what we're going to do. But we have seen that impact. We've heard that impact reported from the field. The goal is to advance integrated policymaking to better serve the whole child from birth through early adulthood. I say from cradle to career. And our research purpose was to answer these three questions. How does California's policymaking process support integrated service delivery? What incentives promote integrated service delivery? What incentivizes us to unite more? How can policymaking be improved to ensure better integration? Those were our three research questions. We used a mixed methods analysis of prior research, policy development and analysis of legislation from the past 5 years here in California. And we placed 2 guiding frameworks on our policy paperwork, which you can read. We published it. It's out in the field, and it's on our website at breakingbarriersca.org. We use the Tamarack Institute's collaboration spectrum, which talks about everything from competition to integration. And we use the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs horizontal and vertical integration model. And we asked a series of questions to everyone that we interviewed. Then we coded all of those interviews, analyzed all of those interviews, themed all of that information, and 9 key insights emerged from the interviews and policy analysis about barriers and opportunities for integrated policymaking. And I am proud to be able to introduce you to Tanya Lieberman, who I will let introduce herself, but I will just say that this work came from Tanya. I mean, that is the absolute truth.
That's not totally true, but I will explain what that means.
I should say it came from the meeting of Tanya and I. That's how this works, right? People meet here, and then we end up doing work together, and this is one of those bodies of work. All right.
So, all right, the truth is that it came from me being here with you guys. That's where it came from. I got an invitation to come to Breaking Barriers, I think 7, 8 years ago. Had no idea what it was, didn't know what I was walking into, and was so just moved by the power of all of you coming together, sitting at tables, trying to work together to serve kids in an integrated way. And at one point, this is the origin story, I think. At one point, I was sitting, because I like to sit at your tables and just listen, just eavesdrop about your conversations and hear what it's like to try to work together. And I kept on hearing SB, AB, SB, AB, and which makes, I work in the legislature, so whenever I hear those SB and AB, my ears perk up, and I realized that what you were all saying was, well, I have SB this, but that conflicts with AB this, and we got the money from AB this, but then this doesn't align with SB this, whatever. And it hit me in one of those at that conference, and I ran over to Elizabeth and said, "Oh, I get it now. It starts with us. It starts with siloing in the policymaking process. So that education gets education policy through the education chute. It comes down to you over here, and then healthcare system gets healthcare policy through the healthcare chute, and it's not integrated up at this level. And then we expect, hope, wish that you integrate it at the local level, but we're making it more difficult than it needs to be. So that's kind of, is that accurate? That's what happened. All right, so here we are. We actually have a document that shows how integrated, not integrated our policymaking process is. And it's the first step in being able to solve the problem that I just identified, which is that our lack of integration at the policy level makes it so much harder for you to integrate at the local level. And before I launch into the insights that we gathered, I just want to emphasize how special this project is and how special this document is. This is a really rare glimpse into how policy gets made. People in my position, Debbie's position, typically are a little nervous about kind of pulling back the curtain and showing the public how decisions get made. If I knew you and trusted you, I would probably share a little bit about what it's really like, but I would never write that down. Well, now you have it written down because Elizabeth and the team did interviews with all of these people who were very candid, and I think what you have in this document is a really accurate portrayal of how policy gets done. So it's just very, very special. All right, do I go down here? Did it? Okay, all right. So there are 9 insights that I want to share. And just to be really clear what we're talking about, Debbie and I work for the Assembly Education Committee. I'll just use the analogy that I use with everyone from second graders up to PhDs. The legislative process is like a parade. It's a very long parade. It starts in January and it ends in September. And there are thousands of entrants in this parade. And they march down the parade route, and at some point, the education ideas peel off and go to the education judging booth, which is our committee, and we say, yep, you look good, keep marching on, or you've got a little lint here and your shirt's on backwards and your shoes are untied, but we can fix it. We'll amend you and it'll be okay and you can move along. Or we say, you've got to reevaluate this whole outfit and go home, think about it a little more, maybe come back next year, maybe don't come back at all, ever. And that is our job. We are in the booth, helping the members. So first insight here is good news. A lot of these things that I'm going to share with you are barriers, they're problems, they're issues. But of course, that's the first step, right? The first step in solving a problem is acknowledging it and recognizing what it is. But the good news is that around 80% of the people we interviewed, or Elizabeth and the team interviewed, said that they believe that yes, integrating policy, doing integrated policy, making policy in an integrated manner will enable and support local integration of services. So that is a good recognition. It's a really good first step. The second insight is that there are existing opportunities in our system to collaborate in writing that bill or developing that budget appropriation, but they're pretty underutilized. So for example, some bills, let's say a bill on foster care, students in foster care, students in foster care, would probably be double referred to our committee because there are education issues, there are students, and also to the Human Services Committee because they deal with foster care issues. That could be an opportunity for me to work with my counterpart in the Human Services Committee, but usually what happens because of time constraints is that I'm working as fast as I can and I write my analysis and I hand it off to that committee and they skim it just for a second and they do their separate analysis based on their lens on the problem, and then it moves on its way. So that's an example of a kind of a real missed opportunity. It's more like a baton handoff than a real conversation. And that is because of time constraints, and I'll talk about that more. Third insight, and this should probably sound familiar, personal relationships are really the currency of collaboration. So does it sound familiar? One of the most common sayings you hear in the legislature is your reputation is everything. Relationships are how things get done, right? And there are really two problems with this system. It's not a system if it's all based on personal relationships. The first is that our relationships across policy areas are not strong. Debbie and I work on the first floor of the Legislative Office Building, which is across from the state capitol. And on our floor are the committees on human services, transportation, public safety, natural resources, environmental safety, higher education, revenue and taxation, local government, housing. But historically, we haven't really known those people, even though we like practically live next door to them. I always say, like, I know the people best who are on my route to the bathroom, but I don't know the people on the other side of the hall. So that's a problem. And that started to improve. I feel like we are deliberately trying to connect with people in other policy areas just to form those relationships. So that's a problem. And then the other problem is, obviously, you know this, right? That if everything depends on relationships, then it's sporadic, it's tenuous, it falls apart when someone leaves or people have a conflict, right? That's not a system. That's just luck, kind of, right? Luck and the luck of getting people with the same intentions in the same place and a willingness to work together. So that is not, I think, ideal at all. We have too many proposals and too little time, so Debbie mentioned this as well. We work on, in the last session, the 23-24 session, there were 4,800 bills introduced. That's too many, and it's too many for us, it's too many for you. I often say I work on about 40 bills a year. If I could work on one bill a week for 40 weeks, that would be ideal, but instead it's more like 40 bills in 10 weeks. So we're moving very, very fast. And one of the quotes in the paper is that, the moment when I most need to collaborate with my colleagues in another committee, in another policy area, is the exact moment when I have no time to do it at all. So that's a serious constraint. We have turnover. It's also, I'm sure, very familiar. Our system is designed to have turnover, right? We have term limits. So our members have to leave office, but that makes it difficult for them to get the expertise and the experience to tackle entrenched, complicated issues in an integrated way. That kind of policymaking requires a really strong foundation, a really good policymaking skills. And it's difficult to do when there's there's the people turn over all the time. Competing incentives. So this is just natural. The priorities of different policy areas sometimes conflict. So we've had conflicts, for example, between education and public safety, education and transportation committee. That's okay. I mean, that's life. And in both of those cases where we've had kind of conflicts in policy, I agree with their perspective, and I think they probably agreed with mine. At least I agreed with our goals of our systems. It was just very difficult to find a solution that worked for both systems. Okay, so obviously, politics strongly influences policymakers' priorities. The main sort of problem here is opportunity cost. So if you're constantly responding to what's in the news or responding to the politics of the day, then it reduces your ability to work on the problems that are not at the kind of surface level, but the problems that are many floors down, and that's where the meaningful work happens. So there is a big opportunity cost. We also have very limited capacity to monitor what actually happens once a bill is signed. So what we typically do is the bills are out of our committee, we start working on the next round. And before the ink is even dry in the governor's signature, we're thinking about what to do next year. And so the missed opportunity there is we don't know what happened. We don't know if it worked. We don't know where the points of friction are that we left for you guys to figure out. And that is really unfortunate. The other thing we're really missing is a good feedback loop. So you know where those points of friction are, right? You know about, I don't know, like HIPAA and FERPA not working, whatever, privacy issues, data problems, these seams that are difficult to unravel so that you can work together. But there's no mechanism for you to tell us about those things. We don't hear about those things typically. And that is a real detriment too. And finally, again, this is probably going to sound familiar, integration is no one's job. There's nobody tasked in the legislature to figure out how to integrate our policy making. So what happens is that, Debbie and Lisa in health, like she said, are both very interested and recognize that there is, a youth mental health crisis, and they decide to work together. But there is no actual expectation that happen. It just happens because of individuals who recognize that it's important, and so they engage in it. So that is also another problem. There is no clear responsibility, expectation, and it's also unclear whose job it is to do this work. Okay, I'll turn it over to Kristin. Thank you.
Tanya's going to turn it over to Kristin. Thank you, Tanya.
I'm Kristin Wright. I work at the Sacramento County Office of Education. I'm the Executive Director of Inclusive Practices. Previously, I worked in another state department, the Department of Education, as a division director. And so it's interesting, I'll say, to think about the policies that come from the Capitol and come to state departments and how we look at those and how we interpret those, and then how we tell our county offices, our SELPAs, and our school districts and charter schools what we expect them to do. And often, it's not necessarily the things that we're doing, right? So we often say, sometimes we're do what we say, not what we do. And I think one of the things that we've realized, and I think you all have realized this in this conversation that we've been having for a really long time, is that we have to go way upstream. And so now we're upstream, right? We're at the place that it starts. And I think, and I hope we would all agree that there have been some really positive pieces of legislation that have incentivized integration. If nothing else, They've brought us to the table together to develop relationships we would have never had otherwise. And I know, even just looking around this room, some of that legislation led me to meet many of you and develop relationships with you. SB 75 is one good example. Are any of these pieces of legislation perfect? No. But they brought us to the table to realize where we need to go next. AB 2083 is another piece of legislation that sort of met some of this same criteria about integration. And the question then becomes, how do we expect it to look at every level? And this idea of community schools is really looking at this idea from the policies right down to our school systems and our classrooms. And so this is so timely in terms of, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to be involved in this project, is because we have spent all this time looking at why we are not integrated. And now we're seeing that from the top down, we have some will and some deep interest in wanting this to change. And we also benefit from having the longevity of Tanya and of Debbie and of other legislative staff who have the history, who are able to remember all these things that they need to put together. We have a lot of new legislative staff also, and we have term limits. And so what we're seeing is a loss of historical knowledge, the same things that happen to us in counties and in school districts. So what are we going to do about it? These recommendations and thoughts came from a myriad of places. You're going to be asked after this to give your thoughts about how policymaking can become more integrated. And if you've ever thought, if they would just do this, well, now you have them sitting right here. So you can tell them, and you can also do the survey so that we can include that information as others are more interested in this. So promoting that integrated culture and practice. So we know, we all have bosses. If the top of our leadership is committed and tells us that's an expectation, we do it, right? It might be our county board or our school board. It might be a legislator. In this case, it might be the assembly speaker or the pro tem of the Senate or the governor, telling us that this matters. Because when they say it matters, then all the staff say, uh-oh, it matters. We better start doing this, right? I mean, it sounds kind of simple, but clearly it's not as simple as that. So this is really about how do we make integrated policy making the goal as opposed to all the other things that result in integrated policy. And so the first one is, what if we established, we being the legislature, not me, a cross-committee collaboration, a select committee with the sole purpose of integrating, right? It would be a chance for us as education stakeholders to be able to come forward and say what's working and not. It's the practice to policy piece that Tanya talked about is sometimes missing. What if the governor's office and the Department of Finance convened cross-agency policy teams too, right? How do we look at all these different parts of government that we know could be more integrated? And we talked to a lot of policy folks that agreed they really do need to be more integrated. Identifying effective policy mechanisms. So how, I think Tanya and actually others earlier talked about how do legislative staff and legislators learn about what's working, or if they did a bill, AB 3632 was a good example. How do they learn, instead of having to do a whole nother initiative and thing, how we just do continuous improvement? Perhaps a select committee would be good for some of that. Perhaps also there would be, at the executive level, a review process to make sure that there were MOUs and other things happening across state agencies. Now, I'll say from my work in the department, I was very happy when we got a charge to have to work with another department, because sometimes that just doesn't, as much as you want to do that, that just doesn't happen on the natural. And regardless of how great the piece of legislation itself is, just the charge of having to go collaborate with someone builds that relationship that we need, that I think many of us would agree goes well into the future. and we've all established relationships with each other to be able to move the needle. Creating feedback loops. We just talked about this. Conducting ways to link local and state levels. Now, one idea is really to be able to have, aside from a legislative report that comes back, aside from a legislative report that's at the very end of something that some people read, I know Tanya reads them. What are those more natural feedback loops, and how can we bring in real people and real stories? And this is really a place where youth could be very powerful in the messaging of how it is feeling to them as it's applied. The other piece, and let me go to recommendation 4, dovetails with this idea of building capacity. And I'm thinking about our work that Navdeep's doing with the Regional Technical Assistance Center. So the state technical assistance centers, like the mom and dad, and then you have all the kids of the regional technical assistance centers that are all getting capacity built together to have some sort of common approach, right? It's kind of the same thing. What if we had joint site visits that weren't just inviting the education folks, but really thinking through them being able to come as cross-disciplinary teams? Because I'm thinking that if you were invited as cross-disciplinary teams, you probably would come. And when they do come, to make sure they stay cross-disciplinary, that the education people don't go into that room and talk to the and the health center people go over there and talk to the health center people, because that defeats the whole purpose. The big thing is really to, again, how do we make sure that the job of integration isn't just through osmosis, but rather it's something that comes from leadership. There are people who are assigned that is part of their job, and that there's a way to measure whether that continues to happen, right? Because once these folks are gone, is anyone going to care about integration? So that's going to be up to our collective advocacy and our students' collective advocacy to say, we are whole children. You're putting whole child initiatives in place. But at the policy level, does that look the same? Do you have all those same people at the table at every single level? And we have to keep asking ourselves that as state agencies, as county offices and county systems, and as local districts, and as even of schools, which is our locus of our community schools. So I know none of these you might not be falling off your chair with these ideas, but the fact that they're not yet totally occurring tells us that we have to be more intentional about focusing on them. So I agree with Tanya, and I hope you do too, that bringing this to light and having these conversations, and then you having these conversations with your local policymakers and within your sphere of influence, will be really helpful in elevating this idea that we've all been so committed to. We're here on a Sunday, all cheering in a similar direction for this to happen.
So the question here is, what is the role of data in realizing this sort of reform around integrated policy making? Because data can help inform this. Do you have any thoughts? Go.
So one of the things that has come up in conversations, who controls the data? And so as we're having these conversations and we're having legislation that brings us together in collaboration, there are different agencies have different data. So this idea that, Elizabeth, that you've been talking about for a long time about shared data would be really helpful in this conversation. Also, in terms of, Tanya, the policymaking process, to be able to call out in legislation specific expectations about data might also be really helpful, since sometimes, one agency will own most of the data and another one does not. And so that might be an area concretely saying, and I don't know about you all that get legislation and then have to implement it, but it's been my experience at all the levels that when you get something, you read every word and then you do what every word says. And if it doesn't say that, then you can't necessarily make a case that you have to do that.
Yeah, I personally think data and information sharing, information processes play a major role in this. We're massive advocates for shared goals for the children and youth of California, for us rowing towards a set of shared goals that we all understand. If I go to my local school district, or which I've done because I'm me, and said, what's the goals? What's our community goals for the children of our community? And what answer do you think I got?
You're annoying.
I'm annoying, which is true. It was like, we don't know. It was really like, we don't know. We don't really have shared community goals for the children and youth of our, we have education goals, we have health goals, we have maybe human services goals, we have, housing goals, but everything's separate. We don't have any set of, I said, where's our shared goals, the shared dashboard that we want to row towards? And I actually have a vision that young people can develop that. We have young people developing input right now on how the system is or isn't working for them. We heard from some of them earlier today. Why can't those young people in their local schools and in their local school districts say, this is the goals we want for ourselves? We don't actually really, we don't really care what you're measuring right now. We want to achieve this. So help us achieve that. I mean, imagine if every, community had youth defining a set of goals for themselves, and then we collected all of that and used that to build a shared dashboard for the state of California, or to align our dashboard to those goals. And if they received what they need when they need it better, those of us that are trying to serve and support them would actually have an easier job. Because in the system that we're operating in now, as siloed as it is now, it's very hard for us sometimes to get them what they need when they need it. So it would help us help them if they could define goals. And we all rowed towards those goals and collectively held ourselves accountable to those goals. So when you talk about data, what does the data role? What's the role of data in this? I think the role of data is massive, honestly, in all of this, and in building policy that actually supports this being our job. That's another thing. I will just say, in Breaking Barriers history, in the very beginning, people said to me, excuse me, whose job is this? Whose job is it to integrate? Whose job is it? Is it a teacher's job? Is it, I don't know, the social worker's job? Is it the is it the probation officer's job? Whose job is it? So what's the answer? The answer is it's everyone's job, right? Whose job description has that in it? Right? Whose job description has that in it? It is our jobs. The policy says we will coordinate, we will integrate, we will transform the system with the billions of dollars that California put into it into a better whole child system. But who's got that in their job description? The integration, the coordination, right? We don't. And Tanya is saying the exact same thing, which is she's sitting in the legislature and they're doing it. The people who see the need for this, who know that we need to be doing this across our agencies. But it's like, because they're you, right? They're the coalition of the willing doing the work. But we need to make it part of the system, part of the ecosystem. The new transformed ecosystem, it shouldn't just be some voluntary thing that you're doing, because I really like having coffee with Navdeep. She's super cool. So we're gonna hang out. We're gonna unite, right? But when I retire, not so much anymore, right? And so what happens to all of our work? It just disappears. Our ecosystem that we're building should not operate that way. Even if our systems operate that way today, we, again, can change that. So that's what we want to do.